abuse tactics, power and control. That's a wheel that I used to use many years ago when I was working with battered women. And it originally was created by the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project in Duluth, Minnesota. And you see up here that there are, let's see, 8 sections on this pie chart. And each one of those sections is an abuse tactic that is typically used by an abuser or by a cult. Same types of issues. Intimidation and fear, obviously that's a big one. And the coercion and threats go along with that. Because if you can intimidate or make somebody afraid of you, then it's easy to coerce them or to threaten them into doing what you want them to do. Mm-hmm. So in both cases, a lot of times what you'll see is that the control is so strong that they can actually get people to go against their own moral consciences or to even break the law. And abusers do that a lot. And in cults, what you'll see is that moral decisions, for example, we'll take the Jehovah's Witnesses, okay? They have the no blood transfusion ruling. So now, you know, a normal parent's instinct would be, oh my gosh, my child is, you know, dying and needs a blood transfusion. By all means, give them a blood transfusion. They're going to go against the natural maternal instinct or paternal instinct and follow what the cult says. And so they're going against their own moral judgments and following the rules that the cult has set down. What happens a lot is that, you know, in the case of cults, is that the leadership claims to speak for God. They claim that they have a direct communication to God. You have people like Joseph Smith, who is the founder of the Mormons, who taught that he received everything from divine revelation. And later on, in the last century, when they decided to stop plural marriages because the law was getting down on them, all of a sudden, another prophet had another divine revelation that reversed the whole ruling. Same thing with, at one time, the Mormons didn't allow black people to attain to what they call the priesthood, which is you have all of the benefits and you have the promise of eternal life and you have authority. You don't have that if you can't attain to the priesthood. Now, women aren't allowed to, and blacks weren't allowed to for a very long time. I believe it was somewhere around 1979 that because of all of the civil rights movements, now all of a sudden, gee, guess what? One of the prophets had a divine revelation and we were told to reverse that. Jehovah's Witnesses do it all the time with their New Light doctrine. What they do is, okay, 1914's come and gone, or any of these other dates that we've set for being the date of Armageddon. So now what we're going to do is say, well, guess what? New Light. You know, just forget everything else we said up till now. We have further clarification on the matter because we have a direct pipeline to God. We're Jehovah's mouthpiece. We're God's spirit-directed organization. They'll try to weasel out of it and say, when you say, well, you're a false prophet. No, we're not. We never said we were prophets. Well, what do you call it when you say, I am God's mouthpiece. I am God's spirit-directed organization. I am told directly by God and controlled by God, and that's a prophet, folks. I don't care how you kid yourself, how you want to deny it, which actually goes to the section on the chart, denying, minimizing, and blaming, which the Watchtower is very good for. They will deny they ever said it. If you show them from their articles where they said it, they will turn around and minimize it and say, well, that's not really what we meant. And if all else fails, then they will blame the adherent. Well, you must have misunderstood us. That's not how it was intended at all. You just misunderstood us. So the emotional abuse, constant criticism, this goes on a lot in the cults. Name-calling, character assassination. I'll give you a good example of character assassination. My aunt, who got my mother into the Jehovah's Witnesses, ended up later on, she moved out to California many years later, and she became a Christian. And she started wearing a cross. She started having crosses in her house. And what happened was, a few years later, she developed a brain tumor. So now the rumor started in the congregation that, oh, the brain tumor must have made her go crazy. You know, that's the only reason she'd start having crosses in her house and wearing a cross around her neck. You know, so this is what they do, character assassination. You leave the Watchtower, you are an apostate, and nobody should ever listen to you because you're controlled by Satan, you're demonic. You just couldn't hack it in the watchtower because you're immoral, and this is the kind of thing they do to try to blow people's credibility out of the water. Economic abuse, the cults typically will demand a certain percentage of your income. The Jehovah's Witnesses claim, well, we don't do that. We have our contribution box in the back of the hall. But they do it in other ways, because what they'll do is they encourage people to forsake their quote-unquote worldly family members that are on the outside. If you're not part of the organization, and especially if you're apostatized or disfellowshipped, your family's supposed to cut you off. Therefore, now you're not in the will anymore. Now the Watchtower comes in and the Watchtower says, well, you can always donate your estate to us when you die. You know, I mean, one way or another, they find a way. They also, another way that they do the economic abuse is that if you have left the Watchtower and you own your own business, they will encourage the other people within the congregation to boycott your business establishment, thereby putting an economic strain on you. Using male privilege, definitely, all the cults do that. They're all patriarchal, except for Christian Science, because Mary Baker Eddy was a woman who started that one. But the women are not allowed to have leadership roles. Mormon women are really only, their only use is really to have children and to teach their children. They really don't have much use beyond that. Jehovah's Witnesses women, their only use is to go door to door with the men, and that's about it. But they're not allowed to preach from the platform. They're not allowed to, if they get a Bible study in a home with a family and there is an adult male present, husband in the family, they're not allowed to teach that Bible study. They have to get a brother from the hall to teach that Bible study for them, and she can sit in and she might be able to interject a comment here and there, but that's about it. Her Bible study, she's the one that started it, she's the one that found the people, but she's got to turn it over to a male. They also, if they're in a group, they're not allowed to pray in a group that has men and women in it. And if they end up in a position where they have to pray for a group of women, she has to wear a head covering. I mean, all of this it's using male privilege, using leverage, definitely. What the Jehovah's Witnesses do so many times is the threat of disfellowshipping. If you don't perfectly adhere to our rules, you will be disfellowshipped, and that means that your entire family and all the friends that you have, because they've already made you cut off family and friends that are quote-unquote worldly when you join the organization. So now you don't have any outside support system if you decide to leave. All you have is invested in the organization. Now, if you're disfellowshipped, no one can talk to you. You're shunned, you're ostracized, you're a pariah. Now you're completely cut off from friends and family within the organization. So that threat is always hanging over their head. This is very much, using other people as leverage, and this is the kind of thing that happens. That also goes hand in hand with the systematic isolation, because when you join, you're strongly encouraged to not have any more fellowship with your worldly friends and neighbors. Now, there goes your support system if you decide to leave. So now that everything's invested in the cult, chances are you don't want to leave.
Right. Well, that's interesting, and you show that circle that really correlates with the abuse of an abuser and their victim, and then the cults and the people in the cults. And you're also talking about something called Stockholm Syndrome, and how that also relates with how the cults kind of, the victims of the cult, the people who are in the cult, when they come out of the cult, they kind of, just as a person who was abused or was, held captive by an abuser, they kind of feel emotions towards that person, and the person in the cult feels that way. Explain a little more about that, how those two relate.
That is exactly right. Stockholm Syndrome, the name of it was based on, there was a bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden back in the 70s, and what happened there was that hostages were taken, and the police found that when they went in there to rescue the hostages, that they were actually defending the actions of their captors, and they really almost didn't want to be pulled away. In fact, I believe that one woman ended up going on to marry one of the men that were holding them hostage. It has really come into the spotlight since that incident, and it's something that the mental health profession really has begun to understand a lot more since that incident. And it not only applies to hostage victims, it also applies to prisoners of war, children who have been abused. A lot of times they will not turn against their parents no matter what. People who come out of cults, battered women, all of them. They all have that type of thing. And this is how it works.